For nearly 3 years, Nate and I have released podcast episodes week after week after week. And while the podcast has helped thousands of owners, we want to go a level deeper and offer a greater level of support to our listeners. Our goal has always been to help you escape the trap that befalls most music school owners, namely that owners who decide to scale their music business often make less income than they did when they were teaching alone. And unfortunately, they often spend more time on their business to generate that smaller return. Nate, why do you think that is?
I know why that is, Daniel, because we experienced this when we began Brooklyn Music Factory 15 years ago. They're just huge mistakes that we both made when scaling up. Even with all of the information available to our industry, so many owners that you and I personally have coached are making those mistakes too.
You know, and that can lead to all kinds of problems when trying to scale a music school.
Like?
Well, how much time do you have? We've done about 120 or 130 episodes on this. Things like low retention, difficulty in finding committed teachers, frequent staff turnover, low or no margins, a feeling of constant overwhelm, confusion about what actions to take on a day-by-day basis, focused, ineffective marketing, long hours and still not enough time to get everything done, or returns, no cash during the summer. I could just go on and on, Nate.
Yeah, I know you could. That list hurts, but I have great news. Something big is coming, Daniel, because on November 1st of this year, we are going to launch the Founders Forum. So if you suffer from some, most, or all of those problems that Daniel just listed, then we got great news for you, because we are inviting you to join a committed, high-energy group of school owners. You're going to have access to the playbooks and processes that have helped Brooklyn Music Factory grow to 7 figures. The combined wisdom of a coaching team that has decades worth of experience in helping school owners grow. School owners just like you. Support from Daniel and myself while you implement profit-exploding changes in your school. And an insider's look at other schools in our industry. You're going to have access to the pooled knowledge of a group of owners that are going all in on growing their school.
We're going to be releasing more information about this opportunity over the coming months in advance of that November 1st launch date. And if you'd like to be the first in line to join the forum, or you'd just like more information, head over to growyourmusicstudio.com/forum, and let's make this year your best year yet. Again, head over to growyourmusicstudio.com/forum. And if you're listening to this in the future, you can join the second wave of owners by applying at that link. Hey, welcome back to the podcast, everyone. We have been doing live Q&A episodes over the past couple months, and you're tuning in today for yet another one. We've got a huge long list of questions here. We've got a live audience, some of whom have submitted questions in advance. Nate and I are just going to jump into some of these questions and answer the questions that you, the viewer, have been submitting to us. We have so many, we're probably not going to get to all of them in this episode, so just keep submitting them, and we're going to keep doing live episodes. You can come hang out with us. And, you know, I do have to say there's some cool and exciting announcements we're going to be having towards the later in the year where you might be able to come and hang out live with us in person. So just be aware that that is something that's coming up probably towards the end of 2024. Anyway, Nate, how you feeling? You ready for to be peppered with questions again?
I love the live Q&A. Let's do it.
All right. So this first question I'm going to answer comes from Becky. She's laid out a little bit of a narrative here. I'm going to read it here for you now, Nate. Often the very first question we get when interacting with prospective families is, how much does it cost? This is usually through texting. Then when we let them know, they bounce. Our rates are higher since we travel to our students' homes. How would you invite this prospective family into a conversation instead of just quoting an amount right away? This is a great question to start the episode with, Nate. Do you want to jump in first?
Yes, but I'm going to keep it brief. Okay. And I'm going to say this. First of all, pricing can never be the first thing that you talk about. It can't even be the second, third, or fourth thing that you talk about. Secondly, I'm going to say that we did a great episode on your sales system and funnel. And essentially, Daniel walked us through a sales script. And it was one of those apps that we did that was so good that I was frantically taking notes in my own Evernote as Daniel was dropping science on how to do the sales call. And so I highly recommend going back to that.
It's episode 77.
App 77. Everybody, but sketch that, put that somewhere, bookmark it. The last two things I'm going to say, and I want to go back to you, Daniel, is couple little tips and tricks. First of all, Daniel's a big proponent of the trial lesson, so much so that he's actually converted me at times into using it at BMF, and we're about to do a version of that in the fall. So what I would say is tactic number one is when you get someone who's via text saying, how much does it cost? I would want that conversation to move directly to, how can I come visit you for a trial lesson? I want to just talk about scheduling and getting a trial lesson on the books as fast as possible. Why? Because this brings me to the last point I have, which is I think texting is a really fascinating and effective tool in some ways in your sales funnel. However, it's nowhere near as effective as in-person communication, which is the most effective, but a close second is talking on the phone, right? So what I want to do is move the conversation out of text as fast as possible, right? I want to be very careful that I'm not just like texting back to them a list of pricing, right? So that's the last thing I'm going to say on it. Daniel,
Okay.
I know you have thoughts on this.
For sure. So Nate talked about this episode we did, 7-8 months ago, episode 77. We can drop that in the show notes. And I definitely think that it would be valuable to listen to that. However, what I will say is that at the end of the day, if that is someone's first concern, I don't know if there's anything that we can do to dissuade them from thinking that way. And so the advice I give, maybe not even advice, but it's more like an observation. What in your marketing system is attracting people like this? That's the question I would ask. If you're getting a ton of people asking about price, then I would say what's at the top of the funnel that's bringing a lot of those people in and not a lot of the people that you would want to bring in. And I'm going to give a small story here just to further highlight the point. A lot of times, so first off, I didn't put my price on my website. That is something that I chose to do. I'm not saying it's the thing that everyone should do. I've got school owners that I coach who have gigantic schools, and they swear by the fact that they cut their admin time down when they started posting their prices against my advice, and they are doing fine with it. So I don't think one is necessarily right or wrong. It's what's right or wrong for you. And that was just my preference because I was the highest price studio in my area. I didn't post my price. What I did post was a ton of markers of value. And I heard this phrase after I got a lot better at marketing. I kept hearing this phrase over and over again on phone calls, people who reached out to me, and in trial lessons, where, and I might have even said this in episode 77, actually. I will never forget this. I can even remember the guy's name and his son, who I taught for a couple years. They came in, I did the trial. They hadn't asked about price. I hadn't given it to them. And we got to the end of the trial and we were talking about setting up, and he got this pained look at his face. He's like, how much is it? And I told him, and I saw his face relax and he kind of lit up. And he's like, oh, good. I thought it was going to be a lot more than that. What that signaled is that everything that I had been signaling across my social channels, my website, everything said, this is expensive. I'm sure I rarely got the price question. And when I did, I didn't really have people not go ahead and do lessons with me. I actually even had a parent once say, yeah, we weren't sure if we were going to do this, but they literally used the words, we have to. Like, it was a little more expensive than what we thought it was going to be, but we have to. And because they had just seen their child learn like a bunch of pages of music with me in 15 minutes. And so they saw the value. But more than that, getting back to the point I was just making, and this isn't, by the way, this isn't to pat myself in the back. Just the most experience I have with the studio is with my own. And so I share a lot of stories from there. And my point is that I probably repelled a lot of people who price was their first concern. And apparently I attracted a lot of people where price wasn't a concern. And I think it just has to do with what I was displaying subconsciously, value markers in the marketing ecosystem that I created. So I'm not going to belabor the point anymore, but That isn't necessarily a tactical piece of advice like, oh, say this one thing and no one will ask that question ever again, or say this one thing and everyone will sign up. It's probably more complex than that. However, I do have two tactical pieces of advice, having just
Mm,
said that I don't. Here's one of them. Um, One way that I've gotten people, they call it a pattern interrupt in sales, is if someone asks that, they're after a particular piece of information and you don't really know why they're after it. And so something I've asked people in, because I have had businesses in the past and currently have multiple businesses now, if I get that question and this is legitimate, I'll say, well, it depends on what you want. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you're looking for?
right.
So it isn't as if I'm straight denying them the answer. And truth be told, I probably could just give a straightforward answer. Um, but there is some truth to that. But I'm getting them out of this mindset just so they can interact with me, which is important. And then I can start opening them up and asking them questions. And is that always going to work? Again, if they're looking for bargain basement lessons, no, it won't.
Unless, yeah, unless you offer, unless your value
Yeah,
marker is we're the cheapest lesson,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know?
So that's one thing. Um, Another, and I did kind of reference this before. Hold on, I need to take a moment here just to think, Nate.
Yeah.
So just give
Okay.
me a second. Yeah.
Yeah. Take a moment.
I actually think I forgot the second thing I was going to say.
Go,
So
go.
here's another good tip, Nate.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say that the redirect that you're saying, the pattern interrupt, is fascinating because this is just like sales 101. And at the factory, I'm always thinking about how much time it takes to go from point of inquiry to point of enrollment, right? And then how much time does it take from of enrollment to point of retention, right? I.e., the families saying, we love BMF, it's amazing, right? So, a little micro tactic that Daniel, you're saying around pattern interrupt, what you're trying to do is direct your inquiry to make a choice. And that choice, I love how Alex Hermosi talks about this. He's like, a choice is the only thing that you're trying to get as you move an inquiry through the funnel. And for example, back to what I opened with, if you do the pattern interrupt, tell me a little bit more about what you're looking for out of a music lesson. And they say, well, I don't know. It's just my child's really, seems always distracted. They're spending all their time on the phone. And I just want to give them some activity that they can do that, doesn't use a device. I mean, I'm just looking for something. And you're like, okay, I totally get that. So you're looking for something that's like a hands-on activity where they can be engaged and it's not technology focused. Great. Here's what I suggest we do. I'm going to text you a scheduling link so that we can have one of our teachers come by so you can experience what a lesson feels like and see if it aligns with what you're hoping for. And so then they make a choice. They may either say, yes, I'll schedule it, or no, I won't schedule it. But you're just trying to tee them up to make a choice. And I think this is honestly, Daniel, like you got me listening to Hermosi like a couple of years ago or whatever it was, and I've been reading his two books and been rereading his two books. And I think it's in $100 Million Leads where he's like, it's okay if they say no. At least they've made a choice. So you can move on to the next yes, right? And I think that's what you're saying. Like if you get someone who all they want to do is be stuck in the price mindset, well, then just help them make the choice no, and so you can move on to the yes while still integrating some new tactics, etc. Okay.
Yeah.
That's all I got on this one.
Just to follow up on that, very briefly, just a tactical thing that someone can keep in their mind. Your goal isn't to, and this is actually where I operate from. I'm going to do 3 Piano Express demos this afternoon, and my goal isn't to get them to sign up. It's to get them to make a decision, whether it's a yes or a no. I just want to help them make the best decision for them. And the same applied in my piano studio. I was looking to see if this kid sitting in front of me right now would be a good fit for this studio. Now, because of the the fact that my values was to be more of a mass market studio, like a studio where kids could come and have fun, but actually leave highly, highly skilled. Most kids were a good fit, but there were some that weren't. And I would tell parents that because the goal wasn't to sell. The goal was to help them make a decision. The goal was to be clear. So it's just a thought. Let's jump to the next question. This comes from Will. And just for context for those listening, Will is actually teaching the same way that Maria is. They both took my former group model, which is called Successful Group Lessons, SGL, which is really designed more for smaller studios, in-home studios, whereas Piano Express, grouplessons.com is really designed more for well, it's designed for smaller studios, but it is especially good for academies because of the turnkey nature of it. The training is all there. It's much more level based. It's much more what's the word I'm searching for here? It's just easier to put staff through that and help them your staff have success in teaching that system. So there's kind of two different ways of teaching group that I've done over the last 15 years. But Will is in kind of that other way. So I'm going to read his challenge here. I use the How to Learn Level 1 books for beginners, and it's pretty easy to teach multiple students. I teach up to 5 at a time. However, once they graduate How to Learn Level 1 and move into the RCM books, this is when it becomes really challenging to adequately teach multiple students. I just can't give everyone enough time and attention, and consequently, my students could and should be progressing more quickly. I feel the parents will notice this and discontinue classes. Most importantly, I want to do a better job and give my students an excellent education and offer an amazing experience and service. I want the parents to feel this is money well spent. And then he gives some details about the class, which I'm not going to go into here because I actually do have a really strong sense of how I want to answer this question, like right off the jump, especially since I know that you took my training, Will. I can really speak to the issue here. If you are teaching multi-level classes, and actually, this would be true even if you're teaching one-to-one private. I can't speak for some leveled systems in group, but at least in the way that I taught group, it was very unstructured. Students could move at their own pace. There were students were in different levels, sometimes even in different series in the same classroom. And what made it work was the fact that in the early stages of a child's development, in the early time that they were in my class, I was not as focused on teaching the facts of music. Even for kids as young as 6, 5 years old, I was focused on teaching them a system that they could use to process the music, be self-directed, and sight read music and rhythm really, really quickly. In other words, I was trying to build a self-sufficient learner in their first 6 to 12 months, because what ended up happening was that the longer they were in my studio, the less they needed my help. My opinion, my philosophy was that the most amount of energy that a teacher should have to give to a student is their first lesson. And that over time, the energy that the teacher has to give in terms of like pumping the student up, pumping them up to practice, getting them excited about the repertoire, that should be able to very steadily and imperceptibly go down over time, to the point that in my observation videos in my group lesson training, I actually had teachers reach out to me and criticize observation videos that I put in there because they thought I wasn't helping the students enough. And I just wrote them back and I said, it's because they didn't need it. Because in my classroom, by the time a kid got to the end of Faber, they barely needed my help. They were playing over the bar. There weren't technical issues. And what I spent the majority of time, as opposed to earlier in my career, where it was like constantly fixing notes and rhythms and helping them play faster, hoping they could play like at 75% of the mark speed that Nancy and Randall put there. That's what I experienced at the beginning of my career. By the end, what I was mostly doing with those older students was having like really rich discussions with them about how to phrase it, how to make it more expressive, talking to them about their tone, focusing on those things. And so what I would say, Will, and again, this kind of is like the answer I had about the problem of people reaching out and asking about price first. There isn't necessarily a tactic that'll do that. It's the entire ecosystem of it. And I would say the ecosystem here is that something isn't being given to those kids while they're in Hal Leonard 1 that's making them self-sufficient. What's happening is the typical the typical experience that a student has in lessons, which is every time they turn the page, it gets a little bit more challenging. It gets a little bit more challenging because they haven't been, and by the way, I'm not necessarily speaking for you. I'm just talking about what I see as the average or what I see as the typical. I'm not actually saying this is true of you. You need to make a self-assessment and determine if this is true for you or not. But what it sounds like is that they haven't been equipped with the tools to make it so that they can be self-sufficient as they move into that harder repertoire. And what that involves doing is kind of going back and looking at how you're teaching sight reading, how you're teaching rhythm reading, how you're teaching them to think for themselves, how you're teaching them to approach music, the system of learning that you're teaching them back when the music is really, really easy, and then reinforcing those habits as they get into harder and harder music, so that by the time they get up to, harder and harder repertoire, they really don't need you anymore. And maybe I'll end this point simply by saying this, that early as I was developing its multi-level way of teaching group, every single kid would get to the beginning of Faber 2A, the blue book, where they teach eighth notes, and they would struggle for the entirety of blue with playing their eighth notes, just the entirety of blue. And finally, by the end of blue, I had remediated them enough. I'd given them enough drill exercises. I put them through that great book, Basic Timing for the Pianist. I can't remember who the author of that book was, but every one of my students had to play through that. They had to do those drills. And I went to one of Randall Faber's summer workshops in the summer of 2009. And he was answering questions of teachers there, and I kind of brought this up, and he did a little troubleshooting with me or whatever. But what I realized was, the common point between all these students that suck at their eighth notes is me. So I got to figure out what I'm doing wrong, that every kid in my studio is just struggling with the eighth notes. And I went on this quest almost of evaluating the way I was teaching it. And by the time I got done with it, and I tried a bunch of different stuff, and by the time I got done with it, I found a very specific way that I introduced them, how I talked about them, how I intellectually transferred the knowledge to them, but more importantly, experientially transferred the way that they felt the rhythm to the kids. And what ended up happening was, it wasn't even me finding a better way to teach the eighth notes. What ended up happening in that quest was I saw that, the seeds of them sucking at eighth notes at the beginning of blue actually go all the way back to how I'm explaining rhythm in their very first lesson. And I changed the way I taught rhythm reading. I changed the way that I even introduced rhythm. I stopped focusing on counting so much, which might sound counterintuitive, but that actually was a major part of the problem. These kids were trying to math the rhythm, not feel the rhythm. And when I learned how to accurately communicate how to feel the rhythm to a 6-year-old so that they could feel it, and I demonstrated things in such a way in those early lessons that they just got the rhythm almost instantly, I was like, oh, this is it. And then I had a whole crop of students go through that started with me after I made these discoveries. And then when that crop of students got up to blue 2A, no rhythm problems. Some of those students that had gone through in previous ways that I had introduced it and were now like in the much higher levels of Faber, or even after Faber, they were still struggling because of the way I'd introduced it originally. So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a couple of questions and comments. Sure. So I have no trouble with the Hell Leonard. Okay, sure. Notes, all that's fine. I think I've found a system where I can teach those concepts. And I did take to heart in your course the last course I took, the Growing Your Piano Studio, about kind of skipping the brain and going to the hands. So I've done that, and it's working successfully. Once they get to the RCM, which I don't know what it is about the RCM, but their level 1 is like level 6 in Hell Leonard. I don't know like what kind of background they expect the students to have to start in the RCM, but it's definitely, in my opinion, not for a brand new student. So I start them in the Hell Leonard as kind of the buffer, and then once they get to that level of the RCM, let's say Prep A, then I try to transition them. But what I do is I I want, I use well, in the beginning, it's 4 books. And then, then there's the etudes book, right? In level one.
Yeah. Yeah.
I try to have them graduate all those books so that they have a nice comprehensive education. And I just have a hard time like giving them the tests. Like I'll skip in the 4-star example. I'll skip every week. I won't give them all 10 tests like I used to. If they're doing well, it's like there's no need for that. So that moves them along quicker. The theory, they can pretty much do it. But it's just me kind of times 5. If I had 5 people in, let's say, more advanced music and just even talking about phrasing, I don't think I can spend enough time with everybody. And students are sitting there, not knowing what to do next, even with the beginners. So I'll say, and I have a TV screen where I put the everything up there. So I'm like, yeah, check the screen. What does it say? And so I'm teaching them to be self-thinkers, self-reliant. And so I'll have them, say, oh, well, okay, you finished that piece. Okay, go ahead and warm up with the next 2, and I'll swing around in a few minutes, But I just think I could be doing a heck of a lot better.
So with what I know about RCM, because I'm a huge proponent of it, are you saying you're taking them straight from Hal Leonard 1 into level 1 of RCM?
Not necessarily. I kind of, they're finishing the level 1.
Okay.
I haven't actually, the students in my level 1 haven't gone directly into the RCM. I haven't gotten to that point yet.
I think you are going in too soon, because Prep A and Prep B in RCM are not designed to be method books. And if it were me, I would take them all the way through Hal Leonard. I believe it's level 6 before I would transfer them off into early intermediate repertoire like level 1. So Prep A and Prep B are not designed to be method books. And I think that could be the issue. They're designed more to be exam books. And so I taught out of Hal Leonard for a couple of years. Concurrently with Faber, I was kind of testing them both in my studio simultaneously. And so I would just say, I would go all the way through a full method before I would ever drop people off into a repertoire only book, because those repertoire books, they're not even graded by difficulty within Prep A or Prep B. Like, in other words, it's not progressive. It's just whatever the editor decided to put on the next page. Like, there might be the hardest song in the book might be on page 5, and an easier song might be on page 48. So those are not designed to be progressive methods.
For the are you talking about the repertoire book?
Yeah, in Prep A and Prep B.
Yeah, I skip around. I look and know the pieces pretty well at this point. So I figure, well, okay, what's best for this student? What's the next thing that could teach them something new or help them advance their skills?
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I think that kind of be helpful right there. Like, just to go through progressive method a little bit longer. Nate, we have about 10 minutes left, 15 minutes left. There's a question I want to get to here.
Let me leave Will with a couple of thoughts, and then let's go straight to the next question. Because I know we went deep into the weeds there on methodology and book systems. And if you're not a piano teacher, you might have just been like, wait, what? So I want to go highlight a couple things within your question that you said, Will, and just give you a little bit of homework. You said, I feel the parents will notice this and discontinue classes, i.e. if they're not progressing quickly enough. I would ask, why do you feel that way? Number 2, I would ask, what version of surveying of parents do you have? And I would actually take 30 minutes of your time this weekend and read all of your reviews from the last 10 years or whatever it is, 5 years, and be like, what are parents actually saying about your program? So
what reviews?
If you have never asked your family for any feedback, then that is number 1 homework to do, which is, why is any family that's been with your program for, how long have you been in business?
I've been doing this since about 30 years.
Love it. So
I'm sorry. I just wanted to say I have asked. I'll ask more kind of at the end of the term. Hey, how are you doing? Are you enjoying your progress and all that? And parents will just come and tell me without even me asking. And I've had students have a pretty good retention, 4 to 10 years.
Love it. So what I want you to do is I want you to just go to those students that you're concerned about in terms of your methodology and technique, because I can tell like you're a veteran, because only veterans ask hyper in the weeds, detailed questions like you are. Most people that are 3 to 5 years into the business are asking, like, how do I do Google ads? You know, they're like different questions altogether. But I think you need to formalize your survey. So, but what I mean by that is just make a Google form. Go to the 30 to 50 families that you're concerned about and ask them pointed questions. What are you, really simply, what are you happiest about in your group piano class? What do you wish would be different? If I could change one thing, what would it be? If I could change one thing by the fall, what would it be? Ask, on a scale of 1 to 5, do you believe your student is progressing quickly enough? Right? How do you measure progress? Ask them a really hard question. Don't throw them only softballs. How do you as a parent measure progress in music lessons? And then formalize the survey with a Google form so that you can start reading the responses, and then you can ping me, just Native Brooklyn Music Factory, and I'll tell you what to do with your spreadsheet of responses after that. I'm going to show you one other really quick thing. I'm going to screen share on this for our YouTubers. This is a really valuable thing you can do if you're heavy on Google reviews. So I pulled up a BMF Google review. You can just search your school reviews. Vibe this. Here's BMF's Google reviews. What it does is it AIs the words that are most frequently shared. So what does Brooklyn Music Factory do? Obviously, more people than not are talking about songwriting because we're a songwriting school. So songs come up number one. Secondly, they love our location, the space. Camp is a thing that we're known for. Creativity is something that we pound this idea, right? So it's another way, Will, that you can just figure out how do your customers actually measure success? Because we want to be very careful, and then Daniel will get to this next question. Will, we want to be very careful, especially when you're like you and me and we've been doing this forever. Like we've been doing it way longer than half our life, is that we want to be very careful that we're not confusing our school that we're building and how the families are measuring success with what I individually as in my case, touring jazz pianist, how I measured success, which is radically different than how our students measure success. We'll have a less than 2 to 3% of our entire student body that stays here 10 years that will choose to go on to music school. Right? So I leave you with that last piece. And that's more of like a contemplation, like a personal contemplation, being like, okay, hold on. Am I actually drilling down into quality of product and delivery of service way beyond what the family actually needs? Mm-hmm. Right? Or maybe not. Maybe you're doing it, maybe you're right where it belongs, but first get some version of answers from them.
Thank you from both of you. I really appreciate that. I know you got to move on, but I think it's more for me, it's a logistic thing. I got to figure out just how to deliver in that class. I mean, just the last thing, I want the kids to learn, one of the RCM pieces quicker than 2 weeks. I'd like for them to be learning in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, at least one piece, maybe two. But to Daniel's point, maybe they're not ready for that. That would indicate that's probably what's happening. So thank you so much to both of you. You guys have both been an inspiration and a guide, and it's really shaped my business. So it's a process. So I continue to grow, hopefully. But thanks again.
Well, yeah, thanks for the great question.
Yeah, Nate, we'll probably end on this last question here that I'm going to ask. This comes from Caitlin, and who I've known for quite some time. She's a bright young entrepreneur. Met her back in 2017, I believe. She has an interesting question. She says, I've been listening to YouTube marketer Chris Do. He's shared his philosophy of the healing power of clarifying your personal life story to build a personal brand. He talks about embracing vulnerability and storytelling to connect authentically with your ideal clients. Hormozy has said it's not necessary, but I think most would agree he currently has a strong personal brand himself. Would love to hear your guys' thoughts. And so, Nate, I want to tee this up and have you start here by saying there's a couple things that I like about this. First off, I know you're going to go nuts on the concept here. Second, I love it when two different, highly successful personalities have opposing viewpoints. And maybe there's because here's two different people who've become famous in the marketing world, and they have very different takes on this same topic. One says do it, the other says it's not necessary. So it's just interesting when you see success. You kind of can make your own successful path. But now I'm even starting to get into my answer. So Nate, what do you think about what Caitlin is asking here?
So I'm a huge proponent of, as you know, of building your brand around personal story. And I think, honestly, it's impossible to build a long-term sustainable business if you're not referencing something truly authentic, i.e. and that usually has to do with your story. Some facet of you is going to be baked into your business. And the more comfortable you get with sharing that piece, Daniel, as we've talked about many times, the more comfortable customers will be with purchasing from you, because they will see and feel and hear the authenticity in it. And then the only other thing I'm going to say, and then I'm going to ping it back to you, is I don't agree. I think Hormozi is playing a little bit of I've been reading a lot of Alex Hormozi lately. And this last summer, I took a stab at writing my first book, and it was a music book for families on how to better understand their kids' musical lesson journey. And I followed a great coach who basically gave it like a 30-day book challenge. And one of the things that he did in it, which was fascinating to me, is he always said, here's the format. You're going to state the point, you're going to tell a story, and then you're going to go deeper into the why behind that initial point, right? So there I was. He'd always have you every single day be writing stories. Stories about yourself. In my case, it was just stories about my musical journey. And Hormozi does that every single chapter of every single book I've read of his, right?
That's so true.
You could pull it out. And he loves talking about, early on in his life as a business entrepreneur, not knowing anything. He loves talking about working with his then partner, now wife. He loves talking about all the failures. He's constantly sharing stories like that. So, and I mean, not to mention the fact that he's like this friggin' power lifter bro dude who's always got some rando like thing on his nose that I think is for breathing. I don't even know what that's for. But the point is he never shies away from like presenting a version of himself that's so obviously part of his story. So that's the last thing I'll say is while he might say you don't need to go deep into your personal story, I think he's not being fully honest in that piece, because in his books, I feel like I get to know him.
Yeah. I think my take on this is that this certainly can be powerful in several places in your marketing for your own local studio, private studio, academy, giant music school, etc. First off, one of the things I tell everybody is that your website should be full of stories, either about or mostly about your students.
Yes.
The parent, if you teach kids, or the adult student should be able to see themselves in the stories that you have in your marketing. This will be true in your social profiles. This will be true in your like website and more formal marketing materials. That's the first thing. Second, the dividing line between you as a person on social media and your business, those dividing lines disappeared years ago. Like there is no wall between the two. So for me, yes, Grow Your Music Studio does have an official channel, but I also have my own personal, like let's say Instagram, where I'm just myself, and I get new followers every day on that of teachers or academy owners who know me just following me on Instagram. And so they can see, what I cooked last night and what I'm getting up to, any given time.
What's your new cooking? Wait, Daniel, what are you cooking from again? House Fresh? Home Fresh?
Hello Fresh. Yeah.
Oh, Hello Fresh.
Again, this podcast is not sponsored. We had to drop that disclaimer in the last episode we did that hasn't been aired yet. But
anyways, if you want to know what's coming in Daniel's Hello Fresh box.
Right. Yep. Oh, but here's the deal. I do have free boxes to give away because,
Ooh,
yeah.
it is sponsored by HelloFresh.
So reach out to me if you want a free box. Oh my gosh, what am I doing? Anyway, but what's interesting is just that, I see people engaging with my stories, and then on both the personal brand side and in the professional brand side. And so people will follow what they're most interested in or what they're drawn to. And so you just be you. It's kind of hard not to have a personal brand these days. There are some tactical things that you can do to do it in a much more savvy way, but this whole notion of like, oh, I hate social media, it's such a cope. Just get over it. Like, and I know I'm not even really being all that, I'm kind of being rude about it, but it really is just it's ridiculous now. Like, I understand if you don't like social media personally, that's fine. If I didn't have a business, I probably wouldn't participate all that much. Um, but I do. And so it's one of those things where it's like, oh. So in other words, to get the life that I want, I just need to take some pictures and post them online. I can do that. That's
Yeah.
what social media is, you know? So just talk about things I like, post pictures of me going here or doing this thing. Um, Great, fine. Here's a perfect example, and maybe we can end on this note, or I'll pick it back over to you, Nate. What does it mean to be authentically you and having a personal brand? Okay, I will tell you. I'll give you an example from me personally that's maybe not as abstract as the stuff I was just saying. For some reason, I don't know why I'm like this, but a good quote really motivates me. Like it makes me just stop and think. I have had days where I am maybe not having the best day, and I have a personal quote file that I've been keeping for nearly a decade and a half, where just quotes I've come across, business quotes, life quotes, quotes about, all kinds of different things that are important to me. I've just been copying and pasting or writing quotes in from, thinkers in world history or people in modern marketing, like whatever, into this file for like 15 years. It's extremely long now. And when we were thinking about like our public strategy in terms of like what content do we post, I was just like, a lot of these quotes have been meaningful to me over the years. I'm not going to pass these off as mine, obviously not, but like let's just have a quote of the week where this quote file that I've been keeping, like we seriously can have like 3 years where we don't even have to repeat anything, probably longer, and we could do multiple quotes per week. And so Bethany asked me like, hey, let's just do one a week for now, we can add more later. And we went in and I picked my favorite 52. I gave them to her. She designed 52 separate pieces of content in Canva, and we've been posting them once a week. And then when we got to the end of the first year, we did a bunch more.
Mm.
That's me being me. That's important to me. Like, and these were quotes that are actually meaningful for me, and they're everywhere from, from like Alex Ramosi, Naval Ravikant, like masters in modern marketing, to like Winston Churchill and Sun Tzu's The Art of War, going back to ancient history, like just quotes that like I was like, oh, that's such a good quote. I didn't do it because I learned it in some online course or because I read in some book about marketing that the secret tactic is do such and such a thing. It's just, oh, that's me. Let me just share this with the world. That would be exciting. Whatever you would naturally want to share with the world, that's your personal brand. That's what you should be putting out there. That's your content strategy.
Yeah, I'm gonna close by highlighting one of the first things you said, which is if you're sharing stories, share stories about your students, share stories about parents' view of your work with your students, and then I'll just add to that, Daniel, that it's great when you can actually frame it in an authentic way where you're the one sharing those stories in the way that you would. Like if I were to take your quote example, when we first met, we brought you on to coach us and we worked together at the factory. And oftentimes I would present an issue and you were like, Nate, that made me think of something. And then you'd be like, through your Evernote, and you would dig up a quote. And then you would frame the comment I made within a quote. And it was like, and when you say like, that's just naturally how you operate, I'm like, for all of our listeners, that's an authentic comment by Daniel because I've experienced it. He'll still do that to this day. You'll just pull a book down and be like, hold on a sec, dude. I think there's some quote that we should contemplate, and you'll read something, right? And so, you know, the equivalent for me at the factory is basically like I take students that I'm currently working with, and, you know, for our listeners, they've heard me talk about gamifying lessons and all these, and being a songwriting program. And anytime I'm working with a student of mine, because that's the easiest for me to stay in the zone with, and like yesterday, Miles does some amazing thing, and he's like, and I'm just like, hold on, dude, can we film this? And I'll be like, okay, Miles, so you said that you could never, ever be able to play the lead line in double octaves, 2 hands at 4 tempos, did you not? You know, and so it's just like an example of me being me in the space, but now I'm highlighting a student. And so that parent might watch that video on Instagram and be like, wait, that lesson doesn't look and feel like the traditional lesson, which is exactly what we're hoping they'll say, because that's what we do here, you know? And so it doesn't feel weird to me. It's not like, I'm not going to pull out a Winston Churchill quote. Why? Because I don't have a Winston Churchill quote on the ready. That's not how I operate, right? But I am going to quickly grab a video and do a fun little jam with one of my students. So, okay, Daniel, I think that's a wrap on this Q&A. Great close on that one, too.
Cool. Well, we will see you all in the next one. Keep submitting your questions. We'll never run out. And have a great day.